his screen, and then he's got a presentation. We've been collaborating on this the past couple weeks, Zach and I. Hi, Fran.
So yeah, Andy's already told you all about me, and this is my 16th year as an early childhood educator, and I think my 10th 10th or 11th as an early childhood PE teacher, and I like to constantly grow and learn new things, and I'm going to share some of that with you today. So welcome to the webinar, Meaningfully Engaging Young Bodies and Brains. And it's meant to be a 3-part webinar outlining philosophies, planning strategies, and practical applications that I use to teach early childhood physical education in my context. The purpose of this webinar is to share these ideas with you so that you may take what works for you in your context and help the youngest learners at your school or any of the learners at your school. So it's not a prescriptive webinar, but hopefully it will be an illuminative one. In the first part, we're going to take a look at some of the philosophies that could underpin our actions when we're planning for meaningful PE experiences with young children. And I'm going to start you off with a quote. All learning begins with the body. It has to. It's our point of reference, our own personal, portable true north, so to speak. And for children, it's even more so because the body is the brain's first teacher, and the lesson plan is movement. And that quote comes from Gill Connell, who is the author of one of the most influential books on me, and it's called A Moving Child is a Learning Child, How the Body Teaches the Brain to Think. I came across this book about 5 years ago. It was given to me by a former pedagogical coordinator, and we really resonated with this book. This book really resonated with us, and it's transformed my teaching, and it's also transformed our school. Our school has become a much more moving school since we started proselytizing for this book and dissecting it. And we actually have had the author, Gill Connell, in as a consultant 2 times. And she and I have been able to kind of form a personal connection as well. And I continue to work with her to this day via all of our favorite Zoom meets and Google Meets. And so a lot of the ideas that I'm going to be espousing today, which are more of a philosophy around why we do the things we do based on neuroscience and child development, come from this book. So I wanted to start off with some brain basics. And we know that the brain is very complicated. There's a lot of things going on all at the same time, but there is a priority for the brain. The brain prioritizes developing sensory and movement development before moving on to emotional and cognitive concerns in more meaningful ways. It's all going on at the same time, but in general, we can say that different things happen in the brain in different centers of the brain. And generally, we could think of it as a bottom to top development. So if we start at the bottom, we're talking about the brain stem. And this is where our instincts are, our survival instincts, your involuntary actions, breathing, digestion, blood pressure, and the primitive reflexes. We're going to talk about primitive and postural reflexes more in depth later on, but primitive reflexes are the reflexes that help the fetus survive in the uterus and the first couple months, couple years of life until we begin to become mobile. And that's the brain stem, the very bottom. That's our base, so to speak, in the brain. So then moving on up, the next priority for development in the brain's mind is the senses. And we know five senses, uh, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. We know all those very well. But what if I told you that we actually have seven senses? Would that be a surprise to you? At the risk of echo, would that surprise anyone?
Yes, and we've now fixed the echo problem. So if you need,
Nice.
yeah, we can chat. So I would
Cool.
say yes. What do you guys think? Yeah.
Only heard of five.
The Sixth Sense, yes, it's a great movie. No, any guesses? Any guesses for the sixth and seventh senses?
I've heard this before.
Spatial awareness.
Yeah, peripheral vision, kind of.
Yeah, I heard spatial awareness. I didn't hear the second thing.
Peripheral vision, kind of linked to spatial awareness.
Okay, yes, you're right there. What was that?
Something's coming to my brain, but I can't. It's like a spidey sense.
Yeah, like intuition.
Intuition.
Yeah. You nailed one of them. But we have. I'll show you now in the interest of time. We're also considering balance as a sense, and then and you said intuition. Now, yeah, you're thinking of intuition in the spidey sense type of way. It's kind of like that. It is sort of like that, but it has to do with proprioception, which is how the muscles send signals to the brain. So those are our seven senses. And obviously, they're the way we perceive the world and how we locate ourselves in the world. We're going to talk about all of those senses more in depth later on. And moving on up the chain, we go to the cerebellum. So this is the command center for movement, basically. And so here we're talking about muscle control and storing muscle memories so we can use them again later on. We're talking about motor skills, and we all know about gross and fine motor skills. One thing about the moving child theory is that we kind of do away with gross and fine motor skills, because really to do anything you need to use all of your muscles in coordination and to control yourself. So gross and fine, while there is a distinction there, there's not. You need all of them for every movement that you use. And fundamental movement patterns that we describe as stability, manipulation, so the ability to move stuff with your hands and your limbs, and locomotion, the ability to move, right? So that's before we get all of these things, the brain stem, the senses, the cerebellum. These are priorities before we get to two other very important systems, especially for school. The limbic system, which is the area that controls your emotional development, your feelings, your preferences, and your reactions to things that happen. So this would be associated with like behavior in school. If you don't have a well-defined limbic system, your behavior might suffer. And also it's the way that you understand, interpret emotional messages, your emotional intelligence, your empathy, the way you can tell something's wrong with a person by their facial expressions or their body language. So that's not a priority for the brain before these three things. So if we don't have the reflexes, the senses, and the cerebellum pretty well developed, our limbic system, our behavior, our emotions are going to suffer. And then finally, we get to the cortex, which is formal learning, what we do in school, outside of PE class, and in our lives when we're working as adults. Your abstract thinking, your symbolic understanding, consequential thinking. If I do this, then this will happen. So before any of these can be prioritized, what the brain's really looking for in the cerebellum, oops, I didn't want to go there, in the cerebellum is automaticity. So automaticity means that you can do the movement without thinking about it, because there's a myth of multitasking, right? We think we can listen to music and write the dialogue for a podcast, or the script for a podcast, or do our grades while we're listening to a podcast. But actually what we're doing is attention splitting, because neither of those actions are probably automated because they're a thinking task. We can only layer thinking tasks on top of automated physical tasks. So some examples there. Let's think about a toddler who's recently learned to walk, and the toddler is toddling and really concentrating on walking. Now they're a very astute child. They do know their ABCs, but while they're focused on walking and you ask them to recite their ABCs, what might happen?
One will not be as fluid as the other.
Right. Or won't happen at all, So either the child won't answer you and you think they're just ignoring you, or they could fall down while they're trying to do that. Or yes. Yeah. What's that?
Alana said they could maybe fall.
Yes, exactly. There's actually in the book, there's an example. If you ask a child a question while they're pouring from a jug of milk, what are the three things that might happen?
Do what I did and spill it, overflow.
Yeah. Or they won't answer you, or they'll just continue going on with what they're doing. So that's because the physical activity is not automated. You and I can pour milk while we're yelling at our children. I do it all the time. But how about if you tried to write with your non-dominant hand? Do you think you would be able to create would your writing be as clear and concise and fluid as if you were writing with your dominant hand?
No, definitely not.
Right, because it's not automated. You have to actually think about what you're doing there. So that's why our jobs are so important, because this is where we work, right? This is what we're doing. So I just wanted to say that you guys are the most important teachers in the school, and we'll move on from there. And this is based on research, right? So it's research based. And sorry if that was a review for anyone, but I thought it was important to establish that base. So now I just want to move on to the move to learn cycles. And in A Moving Child is a Learning Child, Gill Connell posits that the body is the brain's first teacher. It's not the other way around. The brain is not our first teacher. And the reason that is because of this cycle, the move to learn cycle. And actually, when Andy and I were looking at it yesterday, we kind of likened it to the inquiry cycle. I'm assuming you guys use some sort of inquiry cycle at your school, some way to research and refine our knowledge based on questions and curiosities. So the move to learn cycle goes like this. The more a child moves, the more a child knows. So we could imagine a child in the beautiful schoolyard in Singapore, and he or she discovers a seed pod that has fallen from the tree. She's never seen a seed pod before. She's really curious about it, so she wants to inquire into it, right? So she's done the movement. She's been moving around. She's been exploring her area. She's been using all of her 7 senses and she's come across a question, right? So then the more the child knows, the more a child wants to know. The child may bring the seed pod to an adult for classification, right? And if the teacher or the adult has an inquisitive bent, they'll encourage and help the child gain more information. So they ignite curiosity in the child. They don't give them the answers right away, but they go exploring more. And the more a child wants to know, the more a child needs to move. So maybe they move back to the tree. Maybe they investigate the rest of the yard. They try to find things that are similar to that. They try to find out where the seed pod came from. They try to find out what's inside the seed pod. They take it apart. They smell it. They hear it crackle. They feel it disintegrating under their fingers. And all the while they're moving and perceiving, learning, and refining their theories. And then the cycle repeats, right? So the child's moved more, the child's learned more. And then there's more questions that come out of that. There's more we want to know about, and there's more that we want to, there's more to learn, and there's more ways to refine our learning, all through movement. So that's another reason why you guys are the most important teachers in the school, and that all teachers really should prioritize movement, especially we're talking, I think the age group we're talking about is around up to the end of elementary, I think, during the first 3 years, movement, just to give us a little sense of the time frame we're dealing with, you may know that by the time you're 3 to 5, you have developed all of the brain cells that you'll ever develop. And also that movement helps strengthen the connections in the brain through the axons in the neurons. So really, 3 to 5, really important time, all the way up to, I'd say, 10, then it's still crucially important for sure. And, there's different ways that each child develops. There's no specific pathway, and there's no specific timetable. So there's not one set way, but we know that movement is really important for our children, and we need to foster a love of it and really encourage it from a young age. Just another note about processes by which early learners learn. Early childhood learning is a process of compiling tangible, physical, real life, in the moment experiences, one on top of the next. So normally one example of this is apple is for A, which I believe might sound a little bit backwards for you, right? Normally we say A is for apple, but if we're teaching young children, A is for apple is backwards, because A is the symbol. It's the abstract thinking. Young children can't have a really strong grasp of the symbol A in the context of an apple without actually having experience with the apple. So how an apple looks, the beautiful deep red color of its skin, the way the light shines off of it, the way it sounds when you bite into it, the way it tastes. When you shake it, you might hear the seed inside of it, the way it smells. What happens when an apple rolls off the table, or when you catch an apple in your hands when your buddy passes it to you? These physical, tangible experiences ground the child, and that experience allows them to move from the tangible, the physical, to the symbolic. So in a PE context, I really think that means we can't move on to splinter skill development, like skills that don't transfer across sports or all movement patterns, until we've explored the basis of it, the basic concepts, the basic fundamental movement patterns, even exploring a huge variety of balls and materials. They need to really have exploration time with those before we can actually ask them to perform in any meaningful way or build skills in any meaningful way. So uh, I really advocate for exploration in PE class, especially early learning or early years PE class, because these are the ways that they get familiar with the concrete processes and materials in PE class. So that's how it relates to physical education. Another really important part of a moving child is a learning child that kind of incorporates all of the stuff that we've been talking about right now is the kinetic scale. So the kinetic scale really documents the fundamental movement patterns and grounds them on a platform of the reflexes. So we were talking about primitive and postural reflexes, which are the things that underpin all of our movements. The primitive reflexes, as I said, and I saw your time note there, Andy, thank you. They ground our movements. So the primitive reflexes are meant to fall away, kind of. We call it integrating or releasing as, the baby is moved and rocked. And the primitive reflexes, you can think of them as like, there's so many of them. And frankly, I'm not super familiar with all of them. That's one area of growth for me. But, you hold a baby, you put your finger in a baby's palm and they grasp it, right? They're building up muscle strength there. You stroke a baby's cheek and it turns toward that stroke. That's to help them feed. A baby, you push against a baby's feet and they'll push back. So that's building up tendons and muscles. And as you do all these things, you stimulate your baby, the primitive reflexes fall away and they're supposed to be replaced with the postural reflexes. And those are the reflexes that we retain through the rest of our lives and underpin all of our movements. There can be, if there isn't enough movement, there can be problems with holding on to primitive reflexes, which may or may not, force the child to encounter learning difficulties or physical difficulties. So reflexes really important. So we think of the kinetic scale as a balanced diet of movement. So on the left side, we've got the sensory tools, and on the right side, we've got the power tools, or the motor tools, I should say, not power tools. And then it's balanced on language. So I just wanted you've got your verbal language, your physical language, musical language, symbolic language. I've added in directional language also. And the reason language is important is because it helps to build the students' experiential learning. We say experience plus language equals learning. So let's say a child is trying to pick up a heavy box and the child moves to pick up the heavy box. The teacher says, "Wow, that's a heavy box. You'll have to be really strong to pick up that box." So now they've interrelated concepts, heavy, strong, and they've also interrelated them with the movements necessary to perform those actions. And then the next time they go to a door, the teacher says, "That door is heavy. You'll have to be strong to open that door." Something happens in their head. They recall what they need to do, their force that they need to use. So that's how the learning occurs in conjunction with the physical and the language and the reflexes. So I just want to go, and I know we have we're about 12 minutes left. So I'm just going to go quickly through each of the physicalities, and you'll be able to see a little bit of the way that I deal with them in PE class, my PE class, and maybe you guys can have a quick conversation, or it'll get your brains moving about how you can deal with them in your class too. So we're starting off with the senses. Now these senses on the kinetic scale are just the 5 senses, and they're really important for perceiving the world, right? So, and they're not a given also. So like sight is not a given. You need to use those muscles in your eyes to build up eye fitness. You know,
Hey, yeah,
yep.
I just wanted to say just this is your teaching environment. So just I wanted to stress that. So this isn't just randomly grabbed from the internet. This is actually your class.
That's right. Yeah, all these pictures are from my class. So this is a sensory area that I've set up for the kids to do a lot of touching and a lot of feeling. And you'll notice that all the kids are barefoot in my class because we don't want to discount the sensory messages that we can get through the bottoms of our feet. And I really advocate for that. If you can make the environment safe, I would love to see barefoot PE as much as possible. We haven't really gotten much into taste and smell in PE class, but that's on the way. It's on the way. And we're going to move on to balance. So we said balance is a sense, but here it's also a physicality. And balance, you know, we usually think about balance as dynamic or static balance. Can you walk on a line? Can you hold a pose on fewer than 2 body parts? Or, you know, can you hold a balance in one place? But really, we're also talking about posture and your alertness, concentration. Stillness is also a part of balance. It takes a lot of balance for a young child to be able to sit still. So that's the reason why at circle time, a lot of teachers will be spending a lot of their time asking a student to sit still because it's one of the hardest things for them to do. And then we know that balance isn't just built up by walking on a line or practicing static balances. It's actually a function of your inner ear canal, where cilia and fluid meet and send messages to the brain about your position in space, right? So the best ways to develop balance are actually by rolling forward, sideways, backwards, spinning very slowly, swinging, rocking like as a baby, or rocking side to side, swaying like a tree in the breeze, balancing. Turning upside down is a really good way to stimulate the fluid and the cilia. The more the cilia are stimulated, the more sensitive and attuned they become. So in my class, we definitely do a lot of rolling. Using an office chair is a great way to do some spinning. Kids love it. It's also a good core strength exercise when they're lifting their heads and their arms. In the bottom right corner, you can see these guys doing some rocking. And so just different ways that you can develop balance. And we're going to we're a third of the way through the kinetic scale here. So I wanted to give you, maybe since we're running a little bit short on time, you just do a little internal thing, and you can share with yourselves later on at your school. What equipment, ideas, what resources do you have on hand? What do you already do? Or what could you use in another way to help develop sensory and balance skills in your students?
Hey, Zach, can I just say something there? So this is really cool because this isn't just early years stuff. So what this has me thinking about is what will it look like in grade one balance poses, getting the kids to balance on one foot or the other foot, or 2 points of the body only, or 3 points. So this is a really good way to challenge you to think of how you can really work on balance by using everyday equipment such as chairs like Zach has, and those little, what do you call it? Those little things that the kids were crawling on?
Humps. I call them humps.
Okay. So yeah, that's the purpose of this part, is just to really get you thinking about how you can work on balance differently. Okay?
Yeah, so have a think on that. I'll give you about 1 more minute of thought time.
That's awesome. Things right into attachment. It's like comedy stilts, those little, and they have those little bumps on them too. And just talking about the barefoot stuff. You can take the shoes off and then go slower. think, oh, yeah, it makes a good point of the sensory inputs.
Don't we do that? I think we do that naturally.
So Zach, what about? I'm just thinking. What about walking on cushions? Because when the kids are walking on cushions, they have to center their feet and balance. So would that be something that they could do as well?
Sure. And you could even, if you put a blanket over it so they can't exactly see where it is. That's yeah. Or a parachute. Put stuff, hide stuff under parachutes, soft stuff under parachutes, and make them walk on it.
Yeah.
That way they have to use the muscles in their feet.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to the third part of the kinetic scale. And you guys talked about intuition. Now this, I mean, it's not necessarily like, oh, I heard somebody say spidey sense. It's not like predicting the future or anything, but it is kind of like your internal GPS. Like, why do you not fall out of bed while you're asleep? Why do you, when you're going down the stairs and you miss a stair, how come you most often, hopefully, don't crash to the floor, you know? It's your internal sense of yourself in space. Also has to do with body awareness and body subconscious is like how you know where you are when you're not actually thinking about it, and strength management, like force. And this could also be why, like, when you see like kids that just can't keep their hands off of other kids, maybe in line or in the classroom or in the gym, it might not be that they're just bully or whatever. They just really don't have a great spatial awareness or intuition. And also, this is something that students really need to always be practicing, because the borders and the boundaries of their bodies are always changing, right? So they're constantly redefining how they can fit into space, right? And the way that we use this, or develop this, I should say, is tunneling. Tunneling's great. You know, little kids love to get into small spaces. And the reason it is, the underlying reason is that they're gaining a sense of their self in that space. They're measuring themselves in that space. You can see in the top left here, these kids are playing a game called, I call it Tails. You've got to take the rope, and the kids have to jump on the rope to win the game, or to change positions. So it's kind of fleeing. It's kind of spatial awareness. Especially when you have a lot of kids in there, they also have to be looking around. Inclines, we always have a mountain. I didn't have a picture of it here, but some sort of incline that the kids can go up, because it takes different amounts of force to go up, and it takes different amounts of force to go down. This is in the top right here. They're going through hula hoops on a bridge, so they really have to contort their bodies to move in different kinds of space. And, lifting different kinds of things. We use lots of buckets and bean bags, maybe even, I'd love to use rocks, tires in our class to develop intuition.
Hey, Zach, can I just mention one quick thing there?
Sure.
So Zach's, one of his future webinars is all going to be about how he uses storytelling as a provocation to inspire curiosity and wonder about movement. So not only are you seeing the setup of his class, what you will see in the next webinar is how he embeds story. So everything that they're doing is related to a story that he has told. So there's an ongoing story from the first lesson to the end of the unit that progresses each week. And it's a really cool, fascinating thing that he does with storytelling. So that's going to be something that we'll go over in the next webinar. Sorry to interrupt, Zach. I just want to
preview coming attractions. Okay, we're going to move on to power. We're not just talking about strength here. We're talking also about stamina, flexibility, agility, and, we're also talking about attitudes too. So this is like what I can do, basically. And, this is built up in so many different ways. Lots of hanging. You can see in the top left there, my assistant helping out the kids, kind of building up their grip and their upper body muscles. Top right corner, this little guy on a scooter board's pulling himself along on the rope.
Zach, tell me what you call that.
Yep.
Cable car.
Cable car. Yeah, that's part of our story.
Yeah.
Leapfrog is just an example of a power exercise. Wall walking on the bottom left corner, another good power exercise. So many different ways to develop strength, stamina, flexibility, and agility. It's really an overall catch-all for like giving kids confidence in their bodies, really, and what they can do. So we're going to go to another checkpoint. You can think about what you've got, what you've seen, and what you've got, what ideas you have right now for how to develop students' intuition and power.
Exactly. This is really cool because again, it doesn't apply to just 3 and 4 year olds. You can do something like this in grades 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah.
It's a unique way to look at power too, because we can sometimes get caught up in fitness principles of power as being only push-ups or squats or that type of thing. But really what we're looking at is developing power in multifaceted ways using a variety of equipment, right?
Yeah, enthusiasm, willingness, perseverance, resilience, courage. Yes.
Can we just I just want to say one thing. So we're just going to go. I want to respect your time, but I really want Zach to finish this up. But just before he goes on to the next one, can somebody just share one idea to look at power differently in your class or how you might set up your environment to look at power differently, like Zach just showed. So what has it sparked in you? So I'm just going to call somebody out, put them on the spot, and that person is going to be Hannah Banana. Come on over to the camera, Hannah.
We talked about using like the scooter board, and some of our equipment that we have would be awesome, but we're just thinking about how to properly stake it, and even for hanging things, because we don't really have necessarily that for being creative.
Yeah, that is a challenge for sure.
Yes.
I went out and got like a hanging bar, and the one I got was really way too big for the kids. So I had to use. You saw the those, what are those called? Tension bands or whatever. That was my solution for that.
Yeah.
A lot of found materials too: tires, rocks, buckets. Okay, so I'm gonna move on. Thank you for that thought there. We're on to coordination, the last third. Coordination is defined by the ability to move all your body parts in tandem, or not in tandem, but together in order to accomplish a specific task. So we don't have time to go into everything that this entails, but I know that midlines you might have heard of are really important. Of course, right and left dominance, or there's all kinds of dominance, actually. Eye dominance, hand dominance, foot dominance, even ear dominance. And if there's mixed dominance that could affect your coordination, of course, body rhythm, and then temporal awareness, time. So we develop this in a multitude of ways, usually often doing more than one thing at once, right? Or you can see, jumping, a very coordinated activity, right? So sometimes we break a jump down into its respective parts. And you can see that the girl in the top right is really focusing on the swinging there and the springing. And once we break it down into parts, I kind of find that to make it easier for them to focus on maybe one part that's really bogging them down. Crawling is a really good activity. There's so many different kind of animal crawls that really affect the midlines. Again, your body is it's divided, front and back, for top and bottom, left and right, and crossing those midlines and thinking about those midlines is really important for brain development because of the corpus callosum in your brain that facilitates communication between the two halves of your brain, but also coordination. So those are just some ideas there. And then kind of the holy grail, the ultimate physicality is control. And it's really important for any learning that you want to do too, because if you want to measure, if you want to write, or if you want to pour liquids into a Bunsen beaker, you need all kinds of control, right? Positioning, pacing, pressure. We don't only talk about eye-hand coordination, we talk about eye-everything coordination because, we use all of our muscles for every activity that we do. So a lot of control is basically just built up of exploration of the previous 5 physicalities. And I'd like to give you some time to talk about the previous 2 that you just saw, coordination.
I just want to say one thing. So having seen Zach teach for 5 years, so I go into his space, and what you see there is what I've seen for 5 years. And Zach does not, he will do maybe a little breakdown into specifically teaching the technique, but really it's about exploration of, like he said, the exploration of the activity itself. And then the kids really do learn how to do it without too much instruction from Zach. So then Zach, he frees himself up to then go around and to give feedback and to be more hands-on with the kids. So you never see discipline problems in Zach's class because kids are always exploring in fun and creative ways. So that's a really important thing to think about as you set up your teaching environment. So Zach, go ahead.
Oh, well, yeah, I just also like to say it's been an evolution, as I've said, I've been in early childhood for 15 years and about 10 in PE class. I started out, doing a lot of talking and demonstrating and, moving on to like centers and that kind of stuff, which definitely has its place. But this book is what's freed me up to allow kids to do more open exploration, to apply their skills authentically. And in the next webinar, we're going to dive into, how I go about that and ensuring that it's really beneficial for the students. So I just wanted to leave you with one more quote. And if you have questions, we can do that. I thought this was a really powerful quote to end with. A young child is a literal physical child who needs to experience life in her own way, in her own time, on her own terms, and with her own body. And when she does, she's learning all she needs to know and then some. And it hardly ever looks like learning. So what I took away from that quote is, I'm sure Andy's asked you, what are some things you need to let go of in order to move forward, right? That's one of Andy's go-to questions. What I had to let go of was, perceptions, right? Because the class that I run isn't extremely orderly. It has its own sort of chaotic order, but if you look in on it, it looks quite disordered because children are following their own physical needs, and there is an order to it if you look closer. But I really had to let go of that perception that the kids need to be in lines or they need to be waiting or they need to be listening to the teacher, sitting attentively. I had to let go of how I look from the outside in order to really meet the students' needs. So that was a really important quote for me, and that was an important moment in my career too, actually. So I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I do have a page for questions if anybody has any questions now.
We'll just take 2 or 3 minutes. So we're a little bit over, but we'll just take 2 or 3 minutes. I know it's Friday for you guys. And
sorry, guys.
No, don't be sorry, Zach. I think you covered a lot of great stuff. But does anybody have a specific, maybe Zach, not just a question, but maybe a thought that has been sparked as a result of your presentation today.
Sure,
So,
yeah.
Anybody wants to share now, please go ahead.
Can we get senior leadership to watch this webinar and give us our gross motor room back? Because then we can actually, because we used to have a very similar program at TK that, looking at your pictures, I was like, this is fantastic. I remember doing this, but they've taken it away. So I want senior leadership to watch this and go, we really need to give them back their, what they call a gross motor room in Lakeside, but we called it a perceptual motor program room at TK.
Yeah. We also have a perceptual motor room too. It's really important for the kids, and I know we have a recording of it, so maybe we can share with them.
Maybe.
Alana and I were talking earlier, and talking about that letting go, because she's new into teaching PE, and so one of the questions, and maybe even with Lucas, who's new, is what do we need to figure out to teach, like standards wise? And I'm trying to let go of that whole idea of having to check, like, oh, you can do this, you can do that, especially with the younger ages. I feel like, and it's new to me. I'm in the process of letting that go. That's why Andy, I believe why we started this whole thing with you, is to learn that new way of like student agency and letting them do the learning on their own. And so, how do you let go of that? Like, do you have checklists of what the kids are doing and how they're developing throughout pre-K, SK, like all the levels of kindergarten and grade 1 and 2? Or is it just kind of a feel your own way through the different levels?
Zach, can I just say something, and then I want you to answer the question. So it's reframing, and this is based on like Zach and I, as I said, we teamed up with some researchers, and one of the researchers in Ireland says she can't get over this fascination with standards and outcomes. Deirdre, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of schools are so driven by standards. So it's reframing what a standard means. So it's more, a standard is just a guide. Consider it just a guidepost. It doesn't have to be the end point. You're moving them in that direction. So then you give yourself permission to explore and discover and get them on the journey of reaching that standard, but it's not the be all and end all. So as a team, you need to definitely build a definition or a philosophy around what standards mean to you. So if any administrator goes into your class and questions you about standards, Nathan will say the same thing that Alana and Lucas and Hannah will say. You have a common philosophy about what it means. You're not ignoring standards, but you have an interpretation of standards being as a guidepost rather than an end point. Go ahead, Zach.
Well, yeah, I would also just say that, no child develops in a uniform way, right? Or no two children develop in a uniform way. There's a journey of what, a normal, well adapting human can do and how they get there, right? There's sort of a path, a meandering path, but not everybody goes on the same path or takes the same steps on the path. Sometimes they go on the path 2 steps, they come back 1 step, So I'm more in favor of watching the students and doing something what we call reading the moves. So what is the student doing and what is it telling you in terms of what they need physically, or also in terms of what they can do. So the teacher is kind of the curator of their experience. If you become more adept at watching what certain moves mean for their needs or for their abilities, then you can guide them in certain ways and you can set up your environment in those ways. And in that way, you're still in control and you're getting them what they need to do, but you've done it in a way that they feel they've chosen it, So it's kind of a dance, you're trying one thing, you're seeing the reaction, and you're also really knowing your students is really important. So, of course I have standards that I look at. We have a developmental continuum. But a lot of the times I'm working backwards. I'm like, okay, here's what I'm seeing from the student. But it wasn't a specific assessment. It was just like, I can place them on the rubric here. Maybe I'll make a note about that, because I'm pulling the information out of their authentic movements.
Yeah, I guess that was my question in terms of throughout our whole PE department. Of course, the girl educators. So there's, in terms of the continuum, of course, the kid's going to be here and there, regardless of what age they are. But I'm like, my curiosity was, what can a 3-year-old, in general, what should they be able to do? And of course, they might be below that, they might be higher than that. And then what are we expecting them to be able to do, like in 5th grade? Where are we going in terms of continuum? But again, like, yes, like, it's not the be all end all, but where am I trying to guide them to while they're exploring? And then from our PE, like, through all the rest of the grades as well. I don't know, like, does your school have that continuum in terms of through BCE all the way up to grade 5 or 6 or whatever you teach, or is that not something part of your philosophy?
We have, for my age, we have a developmental continuum, and we have the PSPE scope and sequence. We've actually kind of been working on a little bit. I think it is important to have conversations and talk about where you expect your children to be, because it's also, it's context dependent also, right? I think it would be great if you guys talked about your image of the child and at each level.
Right.
But I don't, and there's things that of course, there's so many different resources you can find that, you could use to influence your thinking. I think it's a conversation, really. There's no be all end all benchmarks or standards for, development at every stage. There's generalities, and you can pick the one you like best, or you can create your own. But you just with the knowledge that no child is going to be, there is no normal child, right?
So Zach, the one thing just to finish off here is that they're kind of under the gun I shouldn't say under the gun. They're under pressure to really focus on outcomes, standards and outcomes, right, Mark?
A little bit. We are from one area, but not so much from Angela. And
Right. Okay.
We're going to try and just stick to what our philosophy is, which we're going to work on as a team.
Okay.
And sharing a little bit with Alana about that, and it's strongly related to what we're doing. Student agency, their exploration, they need to figure out what the learning is and how significant it is to them, not as us directing we have to do this, and that. I kind of refuse to do that.
So what we'll do, Mark, is that we'll build in time as a department in one of the future sessions that I do with your team to create a philosophy statement around that, so that it's up on the wall and that we have it. So Zach, I'm just going to I know they probably have some things to do, so we'll just end right there. But please feel free. I'm gonna throw Zach in on the WhatsApp group, so that you can start asking him specific questions, and then Mark, we will schedule the next webinar. So just stay on, Mark, and for everybody else, thank you for your time, and Zach, thank you, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. See you next time. I'll look forward to chatting in the WhatsApp group.